All right, on to the next thing.
I forgot we were doing a podcast for most of that.
Hello and welcome to On the Same Page, a podcast in which two mates separated by oceans and hemispheres talk about books and catch each other up on life between the lines. Unfortunately, we can't get together in person, but through this podcast, we hope to get on the same page.
And welcome to On the Same Page. This is episode 8, and today we're talking about books to gift. It's Christmas time. It's the time around Christmas. That doesn't mean it's the only time of year you can give books. You can give books all year round. And I have been gifted with the presence of Seamus today. How are you, my good sir?
I'm very well. Season's greetings. Season's greetings.
Greetings.
Although
from
Christmas
one
has
season to
passed.
another. First things first, we got a letter.
Ooh.
And this letter comes from Max, and he is talking to us about episode 5, which was on underrated books.
Nice. Thank you,
And
Max.
he says, excellent 5th episode of the podcast. I was really struggling to think of underrated books I've read because my deeply conservative approach to literature means I rarely stray beyond the recognized classics. After ruling out Cannery Row, which was my favorite read for so many years, on the basis surely that nothing from Steinbeck can be considered underrated, the only book I could come up with was Suttree. And lo and
Damn.
behold, Seamus, that was one of your selections.
That was, yeah.
Max says, I love Cormac McCarthy's grey, bleak view of everything, and for me, Suttree is his best on the basis it's the only work of his with sufficient length to luxuriate in.
Damn. Yeah,
Everything else...
I agree.
Oh, there we go.
I wish I'd said that in the podcast.
Max beat you to the pulp after the fact.
Damn it, Max.
God damn it, Max. And then he finishes off by saying, everything else he has so brilliantly written runs to little more than a pamphlet. And he gives us a suggestion for a future episode. Great literary bad guys, bad gals. I don't actually know. I think I just threw that in. But I guess he means, villains. Literary villains. So there's lots of good ones. That's a good episode, Max. Keep an eye out for that. I reckon we'll do that. I will do that coming up. Some good bad guys.
There's plenty.
Or some bad good guys. That's also another episode.
Yeah, that is good.
Who were some good guys who were just trash?
Yeah.
Actually, one of my selections today. We can talk about heroes, anti-heroes. Anyway, let's shift into gear. Let's get this started. Anyway, so where are we going to start?
Let's kick off with the inner shelf. Blake, do you have any inner shelf moments this week?
Well, I didn't do much this week. Worked from home, pretty standard, didn't do much at all. But on Tuesday, I did this little thing called turning 30.
Whoa. And
to celebrate, as I'm quite a, debonair man, I saw a movie and had fried chicken.
Beautiful.
With my partner.
Sounds perfect.
And the movie we saw was The French Dispatch.
What?
Did you see it as well?
Yeah, I saw it as well.
Oh, what's up?
It was going to be my inner shelf.
Dude, we're sharing inner shelves? We have the same inner shelf.
This is ridiculous.
Oh my God. All right. Well, same inner shelf.
All right.
Okay, guys. Then. We're 3 minutes into the podcast and we're already on the same page. Yeah. So, I guess we should just turn this off.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's no need. We've accomplished our mission. Sorry, guys. It's going to be a short episode this week. But tune in next week and it might take a bit longer.
Be a nice change for the listeners.
Yeah, I'm sure that
a shorter episode.
But no, it was kind of Samira, my partner, and I, we had polar opposites. Very much not her thing. I loved it. And all I knew about it going in was just that it was the new Wes Anderson film.
Yep.
I like Wes Anderson. I'm not like a Wes Anderson devotee, but I like Wes Anderson films. But then I realized, as soon as it started, that it's firstly, I don't know, it's an ode to the New Yorker, and it's an ode to Paris. And so it was just like a film about writers, American expatriate writers in Paris. Like, that is my wheelhouse.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I was like, holy shit, you come across a film or a book, it's like, oh, this was made so that I could watch it.
Yeah.
Made for such a niche. But also the thing, I don't know, like, I'm surprised that I didn't know that this is what it was going to be about, because I feel like a lot of the film required a lot of knowledge about certain people and things. I mean, maybe it doesn't, but like, I don't know. You could see all the knitting that Wes Anderson had done in the characters.
Yeah.
What did you think of it?
I loved it. So I saw it at the Hayden Orpheum, which is always fun. For our listeners, that's sort of this Art Deco style theatre. And yeah, I loved it. I also had no idea what it was going to be about. I loved the concept of just basically individual movies throughout a movie, and these individual stories making up a movie. It actually made me think, at uni, I was doing this novel class, and this was going to be my inner shelf sort of bit for the week. It was a class about what defines a novel, and one week we did the book by Julian Barnes, A History of the World, in 10.5 chapters. And all 10.5 chapters are unrelated to each other, but they all create this history of the world. And so the conversation was, is it a novel, or is it just a collection of short stories that lead you somewhere? And so that's what I was thinking during this film. Is it just a collection of short films that all create this overarching sort of French Dispatch paper, or is it the one film? And it's one of those stupid questions that you can't, like, you could have an answer either way and probably be correct. But that's what I was thinking as I was watching it as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think they all can act, they can stand themselves, but it's also, it's an edition of the New Yorker. That's how it's a magazine on film. That's, it's the only way he could have done it. And I loved how they shifted from, the various scenes. And I'm not like a crazy New Yorker nut, but I've read quite a few New Yorker editions, and always loved, the kind of writers who appear in the New Yorker. And I don't know, I love that you get that mix of types of stories and the real.
Who was your favorite story or little mini movie?
Well, I mean, I'm entirely predictable. I mean, I loved all of it, but of course, Roebuck Wright, the character played by Jeffrey Wright, who's kind of the James Baldwin character in the film. Sorry, I mean, he's like James Baldwin. He's a bit of James Baldwin. He's a bit of A.J. Liebling, the restaurant writer, and he's a bit of Tennessee Williams. He's kind of got like a few things going on, and I loved how they made him tell the story from the set, like the TV set, how they arranged that whole system, because that was just lovely. But yeah, I love that. And I also, I mean, for those who haven't, I guess, we're just sitting here talking about a movie. But yeah, I mean, it's Wes Anderson's new film. You'll hear about it, and basically he kind of takes. He wanted to do a movie about the New Yorker. He wanted to do a movie about Paris, and so he blended the two together and kind of blended lots of different American writers who had been in Paris writing back to the New Yorker over the years, and since like the 30s, and then it's through the lens of this made up French town called Ennui, which is like pretty funny, but and it's called the French Dispatch. It's more like the Paris View because it's an expatriate magazine, but yeah, wonderfully done. And so all the characters and the stories are kind of amalgams that Wes Anderson liked. That there's this amalgam of a James Baldwin character. There's Frances McDormand plays this kind of amalgam of a Mavis Gallant character, and he's just chosen things he likes about each thing and blended it into his own crazy thing. I mean, it's kind of brilliant what he attempted to kind of make it Wes Anderson. Oh God, yeah. And the cast. I mean, there's just
it was a huge cast.
Yeah, like, and established people are just put. Like there's the tiniest appearances by I don't know, Willem Dafoe or Liev Schreiber or something, or Blanchett. You're like, what?
Yeah.
But Yeah, God, did seeing it in the Orpheum, did they do any like presentation or talk about it beforehand, or they just played the film?
So it was the preview screening. I assume it's the first screening because Australia is generally behind when it comes to films being released. So it was a sellout crowd. You got a glass of champagne as you entered. The pre-show was a French brother and sister playing some French music, and then they went into the film. So a fun little experience. Always good at the Orpheum, and it's nice. Like every seat was taken in the theatre, so
great.
It was fantastic.
And so, who was your favourite character? I didn't even know.
Probably the art, the Adrian Brody, Leah Seydoux, that whole storyline was that was a lot of fun.
The whole Hemingway, Picasso kind of thing.
Yeah, I did like that one.
Yeah, that was very good. Benicio del Toro was great.
He was funny. Yeah.
Adrian Brody. I mean, there's so many people. It's intense. So many great. Great film, and it's so Wes Anderson. And if you don't like Wes Anderson, and if you don't like the kind of short stories and journalistic style New Yorker articles, then it's not your thing. But if you do like those two things, then fuck,
you should
jackpot.
Probably go see it.
You've really hit it on this one.
Yep.
Yeah, because it's very much that.
It's a lot of fun.
Absolutely loved it, and I mean, for me, the Roebuck Wright character, it was just, I mean, obviously it's like a Baldwin nut. I love that whole aspect, but
well, at the Orpheum,
I love how his story ended.
You got given a little pamphlet booklet. I'm just pulling it up now because I didn't get one, but he actually talks about the writers that influenced him, and James Baldwin is one of them. The book Equal in Paris.
Yeah. Well, it's an essay Baldwin wrote when Baldwin, not long after he moved to Paris, he went to jail for 7 days because a guy he previously lived with had stolen a sheet, like a bed sheet, from a hotel. And the cops came because he was reported as stolen from whatever hotel it was, and they knocked on the door and Baldwin was there, so they arrested him.
Oh.
And then he was just kind of locked in this French prison for 7 days. And he only eventually got out by some kind of lawyer that he'd met at a party like a year earlier or something, and he kept like just phoning, like he had his one phone call, made that. Otherwise, he was just kind of an anonymous person in the midst of this prison system, and he hadn't been in Paris long. And then he wrote this great essay called "Equal in Paris" about. I think it's in No Name in the Street, the essay collection No Name in the Street, from memory. And yes, obviously that was a big part of the story. But I love how they mix it in. The Roebuck Wright, the character who's playing this character, is was writing about food, which is something which it's just a neat little amalgam that comes in for the Baldwin character. So it's not Baldwin; he writes about food all the time, and I love how they weaved in this. Why do you write about all that? The interviewer asks. Because I'm a writer and I'm lonely, and that's just this wonderful theme which Wes Anderson kind of touches upon in kind of all the pieces. And I'm a foreigner in a foreign land and all these things, and I kind of just have food and I sit by myself, and so I write about the food.
Yep.
And there's the whole chef and the story. I don't want to wreck it, but there's a brilliant line at the end where one of them says, "Maybe with good luck we'll find what eluded us in the places we once called home." And that point I was just crying in the cinema. It was I don't know, really incredible thing to attempt. I mean, it must.
No, it was very big.
I don't know who else could have gone for that in that way.
Yeah, in his crazy sort of Wes Anderson way.
Because I think it has to be kind of crazy if you're gonna set out to make a film about the New Yorker. I feel like anyone else would fail because it would be.
It has to be a
film
ride
about
of
the
fun.
New Yorker.
Yeah,
or it has to be kind of like Wes Anderson to make it Wes Anderson-y or something completely different, but also that for it to work. Yeah.
So a good birthday then.
Great. Yeah, very good. Not bad at all. Good way to Good way to run into this new decade.
Nice.
And yeah, great film. And on to our the main event.
Main body of work.
Books to gift.
Yes.
How did you approach this theme?
I kind of actually really struggled this week to find books, because I feel like there's not a generic book to gift. Generally, you tailor it to the person receiving the book, so that changes every single person. But I think a theme that I always go for is shorter rather than longer. I think giving someone a big book would just naturally dissuade them from the offset. So I tried to go for smaller books. But I mean, there were books that I've spoken about in the past episodes that I'd recommend, like The Little Prince or something like that. I think that's a pretty easy book to gift to someone, that whether they read or not, something like that, or The Song of Achilles is a good one as well. But my first book, I have to apologize because last week I said I hadn't read any of this author. And then as I went back and started researching and I was thinking of this book, I realized I had read them. It's Jamaica Kincaid.
Oh,
and
what's that?
The book is A Small Place.
Yes.
So I'd basically completely forgotten, because I'd never really processed that she wrote this, but I read it in Israel when I was living in Israel and studying. I'd gone to Tel Aviv for the weekend and I was in a little bookshop cafe and this was just sitting there on the shelf, and it was one of the few books that was in English. Basically, they're all in Hebrew or Russian. And so I picked it up and I read the whole thing right then and there. Very short book, a couple of hours I think it'll take you. But it's the book is basically... Have you read the book?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
love it.
Yep.
Love Jamaica Kincaid. This is more or less the prequel to Lucy, which I discussed
Oh, cool.
in another episode.
Well, I better get on and read Lucy then, because this was fantastic. This is basically just... It's almost an extended essay that condemns tourism, the government, and living in a post-colonial world, basically, which is Antigua. She draws you in. The reason I love this book is she's so comical at the beginning for this story, and I think that's important when it's not necessarily important, but it's highly beneficial when talking about these serious issues of living in a post-colonial country and the detrimental effects that these places are still reeling from. And because she draws you in with this comical sort of satire, you get drawn in as well. And once you're in, then she launches into sort of the hectic stuff, which is what she talks about. And that's probably why I'd recommend it. One, it's very short, but two, I feel like it's a very important book. It's quite eye-opening. But it's the comedy at the beginning, her brilliant writing style to draw you in with these serious topics and playing them off as satire that really sort of capture you and capture the moment. So I've got a couple of quotes. So this is one of the quotes that really sort of resonated with me. Do you know why people like me are shy about being capitalists? Well, it's because we, for so long as we have known you, were capital. Like bales of cotton and sacks of sugar, and you were commanding cruel capitalists, and the memory of this is so strong, the experience so recent, that we can't quite bring ourselves to embrace the idea that you think so much of. And I just loved that line, like, we don't like being capitalists because in the beginning we were the capital that you profited off. And such a simple line, such a simple idea, but still quite true. Well, very true.
Yeah, she really has a great way of boiling something down and kind of throwing it in the face of someone.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. It was kind of awkward because I was reading it in Israel, and even though I was sort of studying there and living there, I was still a foreigner, and she's quite against tourists in this book. So it like sort of made me question my position as to where I was at that moment. And I was like, oh shit, I'm a tourist at the moment. And I guess that's sort of why it resonated with me, because I could understand where she was coming from as I was in that moment myself. but it was starkly eye-opening because she explores things like racism and how they didn't really perceive it as racism, and you get that opposite side to being on the wrong, not the wrong side of racism, but being the receiver of racism and how they responded to it. And she sort of captures it in this quote. It's a bit of a long one, so my apologies, listeners. This woman was 26 years old. Sorry, they're talking about a white woman. This woman was 26 years old, not too long out of university from Northern Ireland, and she told these girls over and over again to stop behaving as if they were monkeys just out of the trees. No one ever dreamed that the word for any of this was racism. We thought these people were so ill-mannered, and we were so surprised by this, for they were far away from their home, and we believed that the farther away that you were from your home, the better you should behave. This is because if your bad behavior gets you in trouble, you have your family not too far off to defend you. We thought they were unchristian-like. We thought they were small-minded. And so that's the quote, and it's basically just saying they felt sorry for the white people. They didn't quite understand why these people were behaving this way, and it couldn't have been racism, because to be racist in that scenario would have been almost too bold. And I think it's just a fantastic book, and definitely one to gift to open people's eyes and introduce them to a very serious topic, but in a very condensed novel, and with a bit of humor in there as well at the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, she's so funny. But that, that is the real the treasure of perspective. I mean, of course, from experience, everyone knows from experience, someone walks in pretending like or acting like they own the place. The least liked person in the room. Everyone's like, oh, God, that guy. I mean, I feel sorry for them that they need to go to that extent to feel themselves of value. And, to an extreme degree, that's what the whole fucking thing was.
Yeah.
The whole just make another to make myself feel a bit better.
Yeah. Yeah.
Fuck you. But yeah, great. I mean, interesting that you read that in Israel for many reasons. But let's not dabble in Israeli-Palestinian politics just yet. We'll solve that maybe in episode 10 or 11.
Let's hit the double digits first.
I'm Jared Kushner's on it, so I'm sure it's probably half done. I'm sure it's all finished. It's just, we can just wrap it in a little bow. Thank you, Jared. But I had a very, I think, similar approach to you on the same page again.
Nice.
I definitely feel, obviously, that, if there's a book someone particularly wants, or there's a book you're very sure someone would be interested in, then it's a different question. But just in general, laboring someone with a massive paperweight, it just, firstly, I mean, there's the sense of like this. Are you really giving a gift, or are you gifting yourself a nice massage to your own ego? Yeah. Are you saying, here, like, have this book which makes me look a certain way, intelligent or woke or cool or whatever you think it makes you look like, if you give someone like, oh, you just have to read like Georges Perec right now. This whole book, he never uses the letter E. It's like, do I want to read the whole book with someone, especially someone French, leaves out the letter E? It's just like, okay. Yeah. But, so you can, give someone also, I mean, and this is just, I think essays, short stories, poems, they're always good gifts, because someone can just
jump in and out. Yep.
Like, hey, let me just read one. Okay, actually, no, not my taste, but I didn't waste a bunch of time.
But I can say I've read something.
Yeah, at least I can say I've read something. At least I can just get a dabble, see it. Maybe I like it, and then great. And I think as well, nothing so complicates reading as much as a recommendation by someone close. That can really complicate things. I mean, that's why people go to podcasts. That's why people go to a critic. Yeah. Because as soon as you like, oh, this person's like really passionate about this thing, and they're giving it to me, and it's just, because I think art books, at least in my experience, they have a natural order. Things seem to just, it's like messages in a bottle. It feels like it comes to you
when the tide's right.
You're the right person.
Yeah.
Yeah. And sometimes you can try and force things, and you force things, and then cool, you get through it, you've got through it, you like it or you don't. And then sometimes, you kind of just ride this wave, and you're like, oh, I just randomly came to this, like you said, a book in a cafe.
Yeah.
You might have had that on a list or for weeks, or never had for years and never approached something, and then just one random moment comes up where you're like, oh, I'll just read this whole thing. I mean, that happens to me regularly.
Yep.
Books that I wouldn't have expected to, and so many books on reading lists that people are telling me to read. And it was always the same all through my university studies as well. I never read the syllabus.
No,
I always
never.
get given a list, and I'm like, no. But I don't literally say no. I'm like, I fully intend to read this, and then I just read everything but that.
Yeah.
I go so far away for some. It's like escape velocity. I just kind of bounce off the syllabus and just go out into outer space.
It's like, I just didn't like being told I had to read this book in this next week, and I was like, oh, I'm not in the mood for this.
Exactly. So I mean, for that reason, my first choice is, which is a book I have given as a gift, and that is Michel de Montaigne's Essays. And this can seem like, I think I even asked someone who I'd given this gift to, and they were like, I mean, I liked it because you liked it, and I was like, ooh,
damn.
But that feels like I gave you I don't know, like, a burden. Like a professional photo of myself. Look how good I look in this.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, the reason I picked Michel de Montaigne is that my connection with him is so strong, and that Michel de Montaigne, I feel, and pretty universally, comes to the reader as a friend, and that's a great thing to give someone, especially if it's a friend. For those, Michel de Montaigne was a 16th century French nobleman, and he wrote these essays. He kind of invented the modern essay. He kind of invented modern philosophy in a way. I mean, he rebirthed skepticism, huge influence on Shakespeare, huge influence on Descartes, so on all of literature and all of kind of modern science and philosophy. And, Shakespeare verbatim took lots of Montaigne and put it in the plays because he was probably the only person to have read it in England. Because he had it at the Florio. He's like, oh, no one else has read this yet. Here's my chance. Antonio, just read from page 3 until page 7. Yeah, I wrote that, whatever. But I think that's a great thing to give someone, a really good essayist, especially someone who's as clear, as simple and fun and insightful as that. And I remember that actually the physical gift, I've got some old worn editions which I got from cheap bookshops, but I remember I went to this great underground used bookstore. I mean, underground literally, not in terms of it's not on the map, but an underground used bookstore. An underground used bookstore in Manhattan, in the Upper East Side. It's a branch. There's a New York Public Library, a branch called the Webster branch, and then downstairs they have a used bookstore. Like, why would anyone go to the library when you could buy the books down here? For $1. And I used to spend way too much time in there, and I found this beautiful, like, white hardcover copy of Montaigne's essays with kind of vermilion red stamping on it, and I don't know, it was beautiful. I was like, oh, this is such a good gift. It looks like it's already wrapped. Good hardcover. And so that's, I don't know. Have you read Montaigne's essays?
I've read a few. I've got that not that exact copy, but Montaigne's selected essays. Fantastic writer. Really, really enjoyed him. Can I remember any of the quotes? When the soul is without definite aim, it gets lost for if you are everywhere, you are nowhere. I think that was one of them. And I was like, oh, yeah, very that's nice. Yeah. If you're everywhere, you're nowhere. So, yeah. Thoroughly recommend, listener. He's a good writer. I think it translates quite well as well. Maybe that's just my copy, but very readable. It's not too heavy or anything like that. So very readable, very accessible. Yeah, I'm a fan of Montaigne, but I know you're a massive fan of Montaigne, so I'm not as big a fan. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I I froth. I went on like a literary pilgrimage to his tower,
yeah.
to go and stand in his tower, which was like a massive journey and struggle in itself just to get there. It's like well outside Bordeaux, and it was a whole thing. But yeah, I mean, yeah, he used to live in this. He was a nobleman. He had an estate, and then he had this adjoining tower, which he kind of lived in after he retired from public work, and wrote these essays in. He went up there, and I don't know. It was such a paradoxical experience because you have, the literary pilgrimage. I often, make little literary. If there's, a writer's from this place and I'm there. I was in Augsburg the other week, so I went and saw where Bertolt Brecht was born. Things like that. And, but Montaigne's usually it's a bit of a letdown. Usually you get the paradoxical experience of both it being anticlimactic because you have this close connection with someone, and then you get there and you have no connection with their objects, with their physical space. It's just like, oh, okay, that's physical space. And then sometimes, at least I do, you get the kind of rebound optimism of, you don't have to have anything specifically to do these things. I think a lot,
interesting,
myself definitely, and a lot of writers, at one point or another say, well, I'd be able to write if I had my own room, if I had my own space, if I only had,
a
view of a mountain, so the oceans or a plaza. If I only had a room with a view, if I was in a different city, if whatever, but the excuses never stop and the writing never starts, and you kind of get that sense of, it's really nothing to do with that. You can,
it's just procrastination.
There's people who write in all over the place. There's people who write in the most barren, Spartan circumstances. There's people who write with pomp and ceremony almost. There's no rules. It's like life. And but I love visiting Montaigne as well because, like I said, it was just such a bitch to get to. And then I got there, and then they wouldn't let me in, and then there was like a small private French tour on in the afternoon, and I was like, can I get on that? I've come all the way I was in Saint-Jean-de-Luz, which is like a few hours away in the south. Can I come? And they were like, ugh. And so eventually they let me on like a smaller tour, which was private, I think. Anyway, and then you go in the tower. In the bottom there's a little chapel where he used to pray, and then there's a few other antechambers and whatever else. Then you go up. You gradually circle up this tower, this medieval, stone tower, and you get to his bedroom quarters, and then you go up again to the top, and then you get to the study, the famed study, and it's got all these wooden beams with Latin and Greek quotations in them, and his little desk, and it would have been, had this round, beautiful bookcase in it 400 years ago, but now it's bare. And and I was kind of like, oh my god, like I finally got here. It wasn't just like a normal touristic thing, like it felt like a journey in itself just to get there. And then as we got in, they kind of like, I thought this would be the main thing. The guy's talking. My fridge isn't that good. I was catching most of it, but it didn't really matter. Most of it because I kind of knew the story off by heart. So I know what you're talking about.
Throwing up corrections.
Actuellement,
like in Midnight in Paris.
Monsieur. Mais que sais-je? But that's a great Montaigne quote. Que sais-je? What do I know? And then the tour hardly spent a second in the study, the main attraction. They kind of walked in, here we are, and then they walked up into a little antechamber, another little prayer room that Montaigne had attached to the study, and they were in there for like 10 minutes. And so I just had the whole study to myself.
Oh, lovely.
And so I just kind of sat there, cruised around, like,
got the vibe.
I don't know, sat with the desk. I didn't sit in the desk, but just took my time with the room, and the sun was shining in. It was just this little private moment, and lovely. But I thought I would, I'm jabbering on, but Montaigne, like Harold Bloom said of Shakespeare, kind of invented what it is, the modern monologue, the internal monologue as we kind of know it in print, and this clarity of talk, this ambiguity. Others shape the man, Montaigne wrote, but I portray him. And I love how sweet and funny he is, and how fair and insightful, and it really comes as a friend. You know, he said of Etienne de la Boetie, his great friendship, that, you know, he couldn't say why they loved each other, but he was he and I was I. And that's, I think, a really good voice to give someone in gift form. Yeah. And anyway, so I'll just give one or two quotes, because we've already gone on for quite a bit. But I mean, you can start with, both kings and philosophers defecate, and so do the ladies. He's not letting all these prudish medieval French people get away with all of,
hot girls.
He's skeptical. He's coming in. Everyone poops, guys. Let's just cover this straight off. Everyone poops. Everyone shits. Kings have an ass. Women have an ass. Yeah. Let's just get on with it.
Oh, I love that.
It is a more beautifully philosophical point.
No, more about the
they're
poop.
Both philosophical. Yeah. more shit. Michel. Say the one about poop again. There is no end to our investigations. Our end is in the other world. It is a sign of failing powers or of weariness when the mind is content. No generous spirit stays within itself. It constantly aspires and rises above its own strength. It leaps beyond its attainments. If it does not advance and push forward, if it does not strengthen itself and struggle with itself, it is only half alive. Its pursuits have no bounds or rules. Its food is wonder, search, and ambiguity. It's great. Just topics on everything. You can. That's why it's a good gift as well. You know, it's just all these essays are just on education, on fatherhood, on have conversation. You know, so just jump in. You're off. So, brilliant. What was your second
pick? I picked The Tree of Man, Patrick White.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
So this one is a bit longer. I know I said I tend to pick smaller books, but I figure it's a great book. I purposely wrote down a little description for it because I knew I'd fuck it up otherwise and probably just talk for too long. But it tells the tale of the lives of an Australian couple who settle a remote property and bring up a family. And I'll leave it there because that is all you need, and it sounds really boring. But how I spoke about Stoner a few weeks ago as well, it's an incredibly simple story but incredibly relatable, and White just has this magical lyricism about his writing and his language. And even though it's a simple story about this couple bringing up a family in rural Australia, he manages to capture every emotion, every kind of issue we could hope to face in this world, and he just portrays them so beautifully, and he explores life in the Australian bush and what it was like. So that's why I think it's a great gift, because I think every Australian should probably read it at some point in their life. I know you haven't read it, but you've read Voss, but I haven't read Voss, so we balance each other out.
That's such a good choice. Well, I mean, speaking of gifts and Patrick White, I nearly picked Patrick White because someone, and that someone may be you, Seamus, gifted me a wonderful copy of Cockatoos.
That's true.
Patrick White short stories, which is a great gift. And I nearly went with that.
Yeah, true.
And actually, at the moment, I'm also reading. I just kind of started, or I'm reading The Vivisector, which is another Patrick White. So we're really on the same page this week.
This episode's out of control.
Out of control. Yeah, I love Patrick White, and we both read Voss earlier, and did we read Flaws in the Glass as well? I mean,
I have not.
Patrick White is great stuff. And so what I mean, talk about the lyricism of Patrick White. What kind of struck you most about the imagery or that book?
Well, I think he captures the harshness of the Australian landscape beautifully, but I think he explores this idea, and I've got this quote to sort of talk about it, about sort of how I think Australians felt almost disconnected from like culture and art and that sort of part of the world. They were just in this harsh landscape battling to live. So I'll read this quote. And then I've got another quote from Patrick White actually as well, which I'll also read. The man returned to his chair on the edge of the room and looked at the blank book and tried to think what he could write in it. The blank pages were in themselves simple and complete, but there must be some simple words within his reach with which to throw further light. He would have liked to write some poem or prayer in the empty book, and for some time did consider that idea, remembering the plays of Shakespeare that he had read lying on his stomach as a boy. But any words that came to him were the stiff words of a half-forgotten literature that he had no relationship with himself. And I think that sort of captures what permeates through Australian culture, and definitely through that time, but still a little bit now, is that because there's no culture, or there's this perception that there's no culture, there's no connection to artistic culture, literary culture. I mean, Patrick White's got to be one of the best Australian writers ever, but majority of Australians have probably never heard of him and definitely have never read a page of his work. So I think that's sort of what he's capturing. And he said this quote himself: I felt the life on the surface so dreary, ugly, monotonous. There must be a poetry hidden in it to give it a purpose, and so I set out to discover that secret core, and the tree of man emerged. So in this book, he's trying to capture the beauty of the Australian landscape against the beauty of Australian culture, and how they intersect and come together and rise as one, I guess. So that's why I'd recommend it as a gift. I think every Australian should probably read this book at some point in their life, or just some Patrick White, really, because he is brilliant. But that's my book, and that's why I would recommend it.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about this a fair bit, and without sounding too snobbish, I think there's a superficiality in Australian culture which is built off fear and fear of depth. And I think, while there's a lot of beautiful and things that I love about Australian culture and miss, and that there is obviously no shortage of great artists from Australia, but that perhaps more than a lot of places there is a surface rejection, kind of whole rejection. Part of it's tall poppy syndrome, and I think part of it is a long history of trauma, a long history of pretending that there isn't a lot of elephants in the room. A lot of places with dark histories generally like to stay as modern as they can. Yes. Yeah. Especially when they're quite anachronistic anyway, like Australia is. But I think, Patrick White's a great example. I think that was something he was quite in touch with, and that a lot of Australian writers are very in touch with, no matter how far away they get. But and Patrick spent a long time away, and then moved back. But I still think, when him and his husband, or I'm not sure if they ever properly got married. Obviously, they probably didn't because it wasn't legal. But in Castle Hill, I think they had, and for a long time, they had these great surroundings and stuff, and then gradually, like a kind of tsunami, this suburbia encroached on it, surrounded it, and kept spreading forth. And obviously, people need places to live. I don't know why everyone has to move to two cities. That seems like a weird, I don't know, insecurity Australians have. Or just a kind of hierarchy where you're either in the big smoke or you're nowhere. But Tree of Man sounds like something that I've been meaning to read for a long time.
Incredibly poignant. Incredibly good. Probably an underrated book. Probably could have gone hand in hand with Stoner, really.
I think a lot of Patrick White. I mean, I would say you can't be underrated if you won a Nobel Prize, but as far as Nobel Prize winners goes, Patrick White is pretty underrated. Yeah, I think that's the same. I mean, Christina Stead was underrated, and when Patrick won his, I'm saying Patrick like I know the guy. When Patrick White won his, he said, Christina should have got this 10 years ago. but it just seemed like boggling to people that two Australians might have just been some of the best modernist writers that were in the height of modernism.
Yeah.
So everyone was just like, no, that can't be.
That place that's not even real, that place.
Christina, you can't set a book in Sydney, you crazy bat. Yeah, I mean, weird. And poor old Patrick as well. But, yeah, great choice. And, I mean, that brings us to my next choice, which is a gift which I'm not even sure if it's a good gift. Again, it doesn't fall into my remit of being essays, poetry, or short stories, or something digestible. It is a novel. It's not a massive one. It is funny, which is good quality to have in a gift. But it was given to me as a gift.
Right.
And so that's why I thought I'd give it, and I quite liked it. It's I mean, I definitely liked the book, and that is A Confederacy of Dunces by John Kennedy Toole. Oh. Do you know this one?
No. Tell me.
Oh, this was very much going to be a potential for my underrated books list.
Okay, yeah.
I mean, it was published posthumously 11 years after John Kennedy Toole committed suicide. It was released, so pretty underrated if you can't get it published, and then you kill yourself because you can't get it published, and then 11 years later his mum managed to get it published, and then it became a cult classic, and it got handed around the South, and it's set in New Orleans, got handed around the South, published by the State of Louisiana University. So it was given as gifts to people, being like, you have to read this, and then it became a cult classic, and then the next year it won the Pulitzer. So then I guess it wasn't underrated anymore.
Damn.
But it's a great book, and it was given to me as this worn hardback, black and orange hardback, like a kind of old tiger.
Yeah.
And by this supremely Canadian man named John. I don't even remember his last name. I don't even think he had one. I think he was kind of this just guy who like comes out of the snow and then goes back into the snow. He was a kind of singular figure. We worked at this bar in Banff, Alberta called The Bison. It was a restaurant, really. And on Saturdays it was very busy, and so we had two bartenders instead of one. So this guy who'd kind of worked on and off there for years and years and years, called John, would come in and we'd work together. And then during the week he was kind of a backcountry guide, and he was a ski instructor, and he basically was just always out doing things. Like he probably, I don't know, rode moose or something, or like climbed ice walls. He was just this supremely Canadian dude.
Yep.
And just always talking about being in the snow and doing things, and talking about places. And I never had much idea what he was talking about, but the bar view, I've been quite lucky with bar views in my life, working at bars for a long time. I've had some pretty good ones, and this one was probably the most. I had once where I had a straight view of the Opera House, which was good, but this one had this amazing view of the spine of Mount Rundle in Banff, which is kind of like, it looks like Godzilla coming out of the earth, kind of with a big spiky spine which goes up to this great summit. It's a very stunning mountain to look at, and especially when it snowed a lot and was kind of coming down very nicely, John obviously would get antsy because he wanted to be outside, even if it's like midnight, I don't know, in the dark. And that's when we'd start to talk about books, and he kept on telling me about this book, and then one day gave it to me, and it's I can't remember exactly. I think I must have read it pretty soon after I got it.
Yep.
I think and it seemed, again, like the natural order. It seemed like it kind of finishes. I mean, that might be a spoiler, but it kind of finishes
the book finishes
a direction in which I was also heading at that time. Right. So it was like it felt like it had a natural order as it came to me, and it's. I actually saw also once that Billy Connolly said that it was his favorite gift to give people, this book. and it is one of his favorite books. So it does seem it's good. It's a book about this eccentric, obese outsider called Ignatius J. Riley. He's 30 years old, still lives with his mum. It's the 60s in New Orleans. He's an anti-hero. He overeats. He's overeducated. And he basically does nothing but waddle around and gobble up food. My girlfriend's currently pointing at me as I say that. And I didn't even finish my sentence. He's also very cynical. A knowing nod. But it's a really funny book, and that's in contrast to the darkness of John Kennedy Toole's death. He was just a kind of literary academic at the University of Louisiana, and kind of couldn't get this great master work published. He's and it was part of the reason that killed him. But and this book is so New Orleans, which is also interesting why it's such a global book now, and so well known. And there's been several attempts at movies which haven't really come off. But not come off literally. I don't think the productions have got off the ground.
Yeah, right.
But it has big cult following, but especially in the South, it's very regional. It's very much about New Orleans. It's very much about the South, especially in the 60s. And there's even like a cookbook based on the book, like of things mentioned or suggested, like a New Orleans cookbook that you can put with the main book. And the title, I think it comes from Swift in an essay in which he talks about like a genius is always surrounded by a confederacy of dunces or something like that. Also that has a different connotation in the South, but this Ignatius, he thinks he's the genius. He's this overeducated, lazy slob who's just cynical about everyone and talks about everyone else. And he's working on this great literary tract, but never really does anything about it, just eats and fails to get jobs. He says at one point, apparently I lack... I don't even know how to do this voice. I'm sure everyone has a different Ignatius voice. He's a very characteristic, he's a bombastic character. Apparently I lack some particular perversion which today's employer is seeking, he says. There's always something wrong with everyone else. Everyone else is perverse but him. And
I know that kind of person.
But eventually he does get a job as a hot dog vendor, and the vending cart is a big hot dog. And that was like a thing in New Orleans in the 60s, this big hot dog. That's kind of one of the symbols of the book. The hot dog and this big fat guy with a moustache and one of those winter hats with the flaps over the ears in boiling hot New Orleans for some reason. That's Ignatius. But he doesn't make any money selling the hot dogs because he eats them all. He just kind of bottles around and like eats all the hot dogs in the thing. Here's a good quote that's kind of indicative of Ignatius. I am at the moment writing a lengthy indictment against our century. When my brain begins to reel from my literary labours, I make an occasional cheese dip. Everything always goes like that. He's working on his major track and he's railing against the century, and he comes from a different century, but I think I might help myself to another hot dog.
How good. So that's the
he's
humor.
a good one. He's always railing against every other writer. Someone comes into the room and says, "It smells terrible in here," and Ignatius replies, "Well, what do you expect? The human body, when confined, produces certain odours which we tend to forget in this age of deodorants and other perversions. Actually, I find the atmosphere in this room rather comforting. Schiller needed the scent of apples rotting in his desk in order to write, 'I too have my needs.' You may remember that Mark Twain preferred to lie supinely in bed while composing those rather dated and boring efforts which contemporary scholars try to prove meaningful. Veneration of Mark Twain is one of the roots of our current intellectual stalemate."
My goodness, yeah.
He just always says shit like that.
Yeah.
And then there's also some brilliant, "Having once been so high, humanity fell so low. What had once been dedicated to the soul was now dedicated to the sail." And there's even a section where he talks about Montaigne, and I was disturbed. Not disturbed. I was just slightly disturbed when you agree with Ignatius. Because he talks about Montaigne, and Montaigne is very much of the opinion that if you write very obscurely, if you try and sound overly intellectual, if you try and show off how smart you are and don't write clearly and don't write well and honestly, then you're trying to pull the wool over someone's eyes. Perfect example I give is Sartre. Overly complicated for no reason. Heidegger the same. Hegel is what started it all. You know, you've got to have this page of philosophy that's so dense. You have grad students have to study it for 2 years. It's like you literally didn't say that much. Like you could have said that in a much pithier way, Goethe. But Montaigne very much encouraged that. He says, every difficult work presents us with a choice of whether to judge the author inept for not being clear, or ourselves stupid for not grasping what's going on. Montaigne encouraged us to blame the author. An incomprehensible prose style is likely to have resulted more from laziness than cleverness. What reads easily is rarely so written. And so that's baby Ignatius. He kind of just lumbers around telling people that they're wrong, that he's right, that he knows best. And so I've got a bit of Ignatius in me, but I hope not too much.
You got a full-time
I think
shot.
Everyone's got a little bit of Ignatius in them, and that's
absolutely.
maybe why he's so attractive to people.
But so
and
easy to hate as well and blame and act as if you only know people like Ignatius when everyone has a little bit in them.
True. There's a bit of Ignatius in everyone.
Yeah.
And maybe that's why it's a good gift, because it makes people... And it's also, you know, when a book can make you laugh out loud, it's a precious thing.
That's good. Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant pick. Brilliant.
Yeah, Confederacy of Dunces. And anyway, Seamus.
Yes.
What are you reading this week?
This week, I've jumped into some short stories by Kate Chopin. Chopin.
Chopin. Is it Carte? Carte Chopin?
I'm having PTSD from calling Andre Guide instead of Gide. So
but that's, I mean, I always do that when before you hear something, how do you know what something sounds like?
I went and checked. You were right. It's Gide.
That's just an assumption because it's French, but it could have been Spanish. I don't really remember. And again, never met French. The guy. But I always make that mistake, especially with you're like, oh, I've only read this name. How do I say this?
Yeah. So Kate Chopin.
Did you ever listen to The 12th Man?
No.
The 12th Man, for anyone who doesn't know.
Oh, is that a podcast about cricket? Is that?
Well, he's a comedian who does impressions of stuff, and he used to do all the impressions of the cricketers. And I remember he had a skit once about reading the name of the New Zealand Rugby League team, and so everyone was like, you know, Piriwipu and you know, I'm trying to think of lots of Kiwi players now, but you know, all these Pacific names, Māori names, and the commentator's getting them all perfect, and then he gets to number 7 and he's like, and it's Stacey Johannes, and then someone goes in, Stacey Jones. Oh, sorry. And Stacey Jones at number 7, and number 8 is, you know, something 500 syllables.
Yeah, when you're in that mood, getting the names.
But right, I always, you need to hear it out. But I think Chopin sounds right. But I think she was American. So
far so good. She's really good. I think she only really wrote short stories. I probably could have spoken and saved this for short stories, but here we are. I only read 2, The Story of an Hour and Désirée's Baby. I think her most famous is Désirée's Baby. A very, very good story set in the south of America. I would recommend a read. I won't spoil anything because this is just what we're reading this week, but I'll definitely, next time we're doing a short stories episode, I'll definitely be bringing probably Désirée's Baby up, or The Story of an Hour, which was also a bit of fun.
The story of it now is great. I haven't read Désirée's Baby though. The other one I know is The Awakening, I think.
Oh, okay. I think that might be in the book as well. Yeah.
Yeah, that was... that's a good one. I think I listened to that, a really good recording of that. But yeah, I think as well, she was one of these people who didn't quite get kudos in her own lifetime. She made the Emily Dickinson of the short story.
Yeah.
The John Kennedy Toole of the short story. But right, great choice. I mean, I also kind of went for someone who's known mostly as a short story writer.
Yeah.
And that is I've been reading Varieties of Exile by Mavis Gallant.
Nice.
So Mavis Gallant, Quebecois, born in Montreal, Canadian, English Canadian, I think actually, but then she spent most of her life in Paris, and she's the kind of one of, I'd say the main one who Frances McDormand is playing in The French Dispatch. And I first came across Mavis Gallant when I moved to Montreal, and read some of her articles then. And then after watching The French Dispatch, I was like, okay, I'm going to go back and see what because I hadn't read her much since. But she wrote one of, very prolific writer in the New Yorker for decades. And I'd found a copy of Varieties of Evil, which is a selection by Russell Banks, I think. And the title article, Varieties of Evil, which is Varieties of Evil, Varieties of Exile. Hope that wasn't a Freudian slip. So it was great. I mean, she has this. I nearly went with a Mavis Gallant story for short stories as well, and I ended up going with her compatriot Alice Munro. But I think I may be in a bit of a Mavis Gallant mood now. I think this might spur on a bit of
this
a
could
dive.
What you're saying next week is you could be reading Mavis Gallant still.
I'll keep reading Mavis Gallant. but I think McDormand got the character really, or demonstrated part of it really well, or Wes Anderson got part of it really well, because I think she has this, if you remember, that character's caught between this idea of, journalistic objectivity and being part of the action, and taking part in life, or being a fly on the wall. And that's just so evocative of her style as well. She's always keeping you at arm's length, but never out of touch.
Yeah.
She never lets go, but she has this feeling which always pervades of not objectivity, but that she's an outcast, that she's viewing things from an orbit around the world, which I think is something a lot of writers and outsiders feel, and something which The French Dispatch was really trying to get at. Foreigners in a different place. But that's such a strong stylistic aspect of Mavis Gallant, is this ability to kind of brush aside some of her best lines, or where she's forgetting something, brushing something aside as if it wasn't as important as it is, considering that she's putting it in a story, considering it's an important part of a story. And then the characters, always trying to brush it away, always trying to be like, oh, then I forgot about that person who I was deeply in love with and then died in the war. Forgot about that. But she does it in such a way. But Mavis Gallant and Varieties of Exile. So that's been good to dip into this week.
Brilliant. Good choice.
And some lovely choices today. And as per usual, it's good to get a letter. And so hopefully more people write in.
Please do.
We should tell them that we have a new email address.
Yes.
Which is Seamus and Blake at gmail.com. So you can send your emails there.
Yeah, hope you guys enjoyed the episode and had a very Merry Christmas, and you're looking forward to 2022. Thank you so much for supporting us this year on our journey to start a podcast. We promise 2022 is going to be bigger and better. We'll get better every week. We promise.
Yeah, but I think things are going. I'm really enjoying this, and it's just a fun thing to do every week that I look forward to, and
hopefully you guys look forward to it as well.
Yeah, just be flies in the wall, be Mavis Gallants, and Hope you are liking it. Send in your recommendations, send in your ideas, tell us what's going on, send in your inner shelves, talk about what people are out there feeling.
Yeah, let us know.
They're vibing, how they're going. And Happy New Year.